Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Agile Nova. It's been a long time since we had an event, and today we're kicking off the new year with Matt Barcomb. We are talking about the why transformations fail and what to do to avoid failure. I'm not good at long introductions, but I I know Matt from different conferences and hanging out with talking about Agile and things that happen in organization. A lot of fun stories and humorous conversations. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass it on and let him introduce himself and kick us off.
Alrighty. I'm Matt. I've done org things, product things. That's what I'm doing mostly now is product coaching consulting. And I suppose I'm doing that through the lens of worker cooperative. So we've uh, formed as a collective, and then we're trying to launch as a worker cooperative. And I suppose it's a bit of a spoiler, but I think a lot of our change initiatives fail because of how we choose to structure the power in our organization. But more on that in the presentation, I suppose. I'll also point out I've worked with Adam here multiple times, and we have both been on failing transformations together. So, with such a small group, it feels weird to like go through the slides as a big old talk, so we can kind of do this as a conversation if that feels better for everybody or not.
We're old failure buddies.
Failure buddies. Um, so this is why transformation fail. So I'll share a fun to me story about this was I wanted a picture that would describe satirically transformations failing. And I found the classic picture of a dumpster fire. And then I found this picture of porta potties on fire. And I put both on LinkedIn and asked for a vote back and on Twitter, actually, about which one should I use. And overwhelmingly, the porta potties won. I had one vote for the traditional dumpster fire. And there were so many awesome, like amazing metaphors, like, oh, look, each porta potty, it could be an organizational silo. And, you look at a dumpster fire and you think, oh, someone should put that out. Not, oh my God, people could be in there. Um, so I think that the flaming shitters is a great metaphor for transformation. How do I, there we go. So I guess I normally start by asking you all what you think a transformation is, but I think two of you have been to this talk before. So
Wait, can I answer as if I'm one of my customers?
yeah, what do your customers think a transformation is?
My customers think anything you do new is a transformation. So
Yeah,
it's almost like change has now been replaced by the word transformation.
yeah, I agree
And
with that. I don't agree with it. I agree that I see that frequently
yeah,
too. Um, so something I try to point out, and I think probably everybody on this call would agree, it's transformation shouldn't just be any little change. It's large scale, it's radical to how a business operates. That still leaves a lot of subjective room for interpretation. So, like, one of my favorite questions to ask, because I thought the answer was obvious, but I've gotten disagreement with this at conferences, is if we just teach all of our teams Scrum, is that a transformation? I thought the answer was no. Like, if that's all we're doing is teaching just a team level layer how to do one methodology, that I didn't think that was really a radical change to how business operates. But some people had a different opinion, and so that was interesting to me. Um, so yeah, so some room, some wiggle room. What about when you need to transform? So assuming the prior definition, when might a business think they need to transform?
Usually when they're in trouble.
Their trouble, and when the shitters are on fire, right? Oh my God.
Well, in retail enterprise, it's constant fire, and it's a every 2 to 3 year rollover of the chief executive technologist. And so whenever that guy shows up, he has to say, everything the guy did before me is why there's problems. And he has to transform everything. And he creates a 4-year transformation plan. And that way he'll be done in 2.5. And then
Yeah, that's been a I used to joke that like, hey, when you first get into the job, your first 12 months, you're being the cool executive that, I'm not going to make a lot of changes. I'm just learning and taking it all in. Then your second 12 months is like, well, shit, we need to reorg. So that buys you a good 3 years, and then you're gone because the average executive tenure is like what, 4.5 years or something like that. So it's pretty bad. So this is my belief.
My other favorite about why to transform, and this, I haven't heard this probably in 3 or 4 years, but for a while there, I worked for a bunch of big companies, and you'd finally find out the secret. Like you'd be in the right meeting, and someone would finally admit, "Well, Wall Street wants us to transform."
That's true.
I was at ADP. Yeah, that ADP, the payroll company, when they were transforming, and I was so like I knew it wasn't going to be a real transformation after about 6 months, but when I actually got that news, I was like, okay, well, it's really time for me to go because I can't even imagine
and
how
who is Wall Street?
anyone,
Like that,
how could
that's code for board of directors, right?
Right. Or investors equally unaware of what happens during a transformation or in an IT department or anything like
Of
that.
any kind at all.
I'm hoping that cycle has passed, but who knows? It might like everything else, might pop back up again, in 5 years.
And that's actually maybe to this slide, like everything that's old is new again. As much as everybody is kind of shitting on Agile being dead or Agile transformations not working, like this hasn't been our first change rodeo. I mean, we've been sucking at changing the world of work for the better part of the last century, to be honest. It's funny because, and I actually had a good friend of mine call me out that as much as we like to hate on Taylor and Taylorism, Taylor tried to do some good things in his mind. It's not like he was showing up trying to be evil. And even Taylor was experiencing resistance to change of Taylorism. It's not like Taylor came and said, "Hey, here's scientific management," and everybody was like, "Oh shit, that's amazing. Like, let's just all do that." But it's interesting that like anytime there's a big shift in how, who's got the cheese and if we're moving the cheese. So we've been failing at large scale org change initiatives for a long time. And this is kind of why I said earlier, um, it comes down to, I think, fundamentally power structures and how they feel threatened by the change. And the people that have the power have been in place for a while and they're getting most of the cookies. So, you know, it's disruptive. If we're going to come in and transform something, a major large scale change, that could be very disruptive to the people that have the power or potentially. So that's a thing to think about, that we have been failing at these for a while. Failing is not new, and we're probably going to keep failing until we maybe dig a little bit deeper and look at something more fundamental. Hello, Jen. That being said, I still think there's some things that we could do. This is a quote. This was a quote given to me by an executive during a sales call for a transformation. When he was asking why I thought, like, why would your approach be different? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not sure my approach would be different because it's you guys are the ones that need to change. And during the call, he said that what most transformations seem to transform is revenue to expense. It's probably one of my favorite quotes ever. Alrighty, so there are lots of reasons transformations fail. This list is not meant to be exhaustive, but these are my 5 favorite reasons that transformations fail. It's not really worth it. It's too risky for senior leadership. It's not well aligned. It's not systems first, and it's not people centered. And in my mind, these kind of go in order from like most problematic that we can't really do anything about, like Betsy, to your point, like it's not really worth it. Would a version of that would be Wall Street wanted us to do it, down to things like systems first, people centered change. So, actually, Wall Street wants us to do it is a great example. I was at a very large Canadian bank, and they were doing a transformation, And the reality was they didn't need to. They're the 10th largest bank in the world. They made a ridiculous amount of money. Um, could they be better? Could they tweak this? Were there threats in their space? Sort of like but the kinds of threats that like they would be addressing were on a 5+ year horizon, and were certainly not the kinds of threats that like teaching your dev team Scrum was going to do anything about. And they had so much money that a lot of the threats they could just use this approach with. Like they could buy the competition, they could get into new markets, they could, there's a lot. I mean, they were so large, and in that country, they're able to influence policy and government. So there's a lot that I've seen in terms of large companies that don't really need to transform. I mean, we could say they need to, like, oh, they need to come up with the times, and socially, fundamentally, I'd probably even agree with you on a you know personal level. But the reality is they're big and they're fat and they're happy, and they don't really need to change. They're the giant whale that has evolved for the ocean. And we can say like, hey, but the ocean temperature is changing. And we're like, yeah, but we got like a good few decades. Like, so it's the blue whales aren't going away yet. So what do we do when we know that it's not really worth it? So I think the first thing we can do is just know when it is really worth it. And so you pointed this out, like when do companies often want a transformation? When the shitters are on fire. So the two times that I've seen large scale change have a chance at success, it's been one of these two reasons. There's a large crisis, it's either there or looming, or it's a company that's about to experience accelerated growth. So the first one is problematic. I mean, it's good for change. Like there's definitely a fire has been lit. People want to do something because they can see the problem. They're in the problem. The problem is people are also frantic. And while they might be willing to try things they've never tried before, they also are doing that while almost doubling down on the behaviors that got them there in the first place because they're panicking. Um, the accelerated growth is nice, although even that has its own little problems, but at least they're at a precipice of pain because of success, not crisis and failure. So one example of this is like a mid-sized company that is realizing it is about to grow to like an enterprise class company. It wants to keep certain things true, like it still maybe has a bit of that startup vibe, or the CEO like still knows everybody. They're a couple hundred people and they know they're about to grow to a couple thousand people, and they would like to try to keep their soul intact as they scale. I don't know if that's truly possible, but I'd like to think that at least it's coming from a good place. I'd throw another one in here. I would say that sometimes if there's a visionary leader, it's possible. I don't know if that's true for like Fortune 500s or larger. Some people would say that Apple did this, like Apple transformed when Steve Jobs came back. I don't know. That's an interesting point. But I think there's a possibility when you've got a strong set of people that are willing to do whatever they think is transformative based on principle, and they have the power to do it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Although I was reminded of this quote from Deming just this week, that something that, Adam, you might know this better than I do. It only takes the square root of the number of people in an organization to start affecting change within the organization, meaningful change. The square root quote. I'll have to look it up. So another thing that we can do is not try to transform. I think that this might be where, like, at least with regards to change initiatives are going for the next little while. It might be this. So instead of transforming, maybe we should optimize. I don't know if optimize is the right word, but how do we do smaller little things instead of trying to say we need to become a product org? Like, let's find some smaller thing that we know can be better. It can still be an organizational thing, like how do we change how we do road mapping, or can we influence how strategy happens, or something that maybe slices a thread or a little chunk an area with. But it probably needs to be a meaningful problem with a meaningful business outcome, and it doesn't have to have the goal of supposedly transforming the org. We just need to be able to make measurable progress on something specific. So that's what I mean by optimization, and then we avoid this circumstance of transforming and the whole boat flipping over, and then everybody. I'm sure all those people were fine. I don't actually know what this picture is, but but that's what I think most orgs feel like when they're going through a transformation. All right, too risky for senior leaders. And guys, feel free to jump in anytime. It's like 6 of us, so it's all good. I like this one a lot. So when the leader, whoever the leader is, can't admit to needing to be part of the change, and can't admit, I think can mean two things. I think can't admit, like, whatever reason, their ego or their makeup like won't allow them to see, like, they see themselves as successful and they can't admit to it. Like, they don't even see it. They can't be a part of the change. They think their people need to change, or those people over there need to change. That's one way I think senior leaders can't admit to needing to be a part of a change. But I see this other version just as frequently, I think, maybe even more frequently, is they know they should probably be a part of the change, but they can't admit to it in front of their peers and superiors. It's like using your turn signal in Boston. It's a sign of weakness, and people will run you off the road. And if you're the VP of technology and you're admitting that your leadership style needs to be better, well, geez, you can't tell your boss that, or you can't let that be known to your peers, because they will come after you. And that's definitely been something that's been shared, that like they have to be very cautious about how they frame the change that they're going to be a part of. If they're going to change their job or their role or their responsibilities, they have to be very cautious about how that looks horizontally and up. So that's kind of a good reason, because, well, probably because of the second slide. Oh, not this one, but yeah, I'll show you in a second. I think the status quo is the safest bet is probably a huge piece of it. If you put yourself in the role of VP of technology or VP of product, you're kind of Adam's point, like, you can come in and let's reorg for 4 years and I'll be gone in 2.5. Like, if you come in and if you don't do much, you're already getting great compensation and good benefits. So if you come in and you stick your neck out for something that looks very different, it's very big and very risky, well, the upside is what? Like, probably not a promotion, but maybe that would be like the best possible scenario is one promotion. If you're a VP of technology, maybe you get promoted to CTO if there's not already a CTO. So promotion is maybe. You might get a big bonus that year, like maybe a really nice bonus that 1 year. If you think about the opposite, though, if you're still in that role, VP of technology, VP of product, and you stick your neck out and you take this big bet and it goes wrong, and you are, whether it's right or not, you get blamed for everything that went bad at the company that year. You might, at the best case scenario, is you just get stuck. You don't get any bonuses, you don't get a promotion, you just get stuck, and everybody feels that you're just not really great at what you do. You might be asked to spend more time with the family or encouraged to succeed elsewhere. Like, you might get fired. So it's kind of weird when you think about how these pressures push us towards the status quo. If you take the same risk, if the upside is still make the giant, compensation you're getting versus getting fired, what would you choose to do? Versus how bad is it really? Which is probably why we don't see things like crisis or, accelerated growth being the things that really get leaders on board with these large changes. So, and this isn't the fault of the leaders, of the individuals at all. This is a systemic challenge that we have. It's the pressure of the ecosystem that is incentivizing and encouraging the status quo. And so we kind of just get this, I think of this like volcano of mediocrity that explodes into most orgs. So what can we do about it? Well, I think the reality being that change will always be shaped by those with the power. And what I mean by that is, like, and we kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, as soon as people that have power to shape the change get threatened, they're going to react to that in some way. So I think the best thing you can hope for, knowing that that is a reality and you can't change it, there are people, they have power, they will feel threatened. You can try to figure out what their interests are, what motivates them to do things they do, what's in it for them, and figure out how to tie whatever change you think you can back to something that is going to be in their interest in whatever is interesting to them. And sort of related to that is maybe then try to help them take on smaller things. And something that I've been hearing for a lot of years is make experiments smaller, make experiments safe to fail. And I like that idea. Something that seems to be less palatable with some of my coaching friends is you can't just make everything a small experiment. or you can make it small. Like things can be thinned down, but some experiments by their nature are bigger, like they're organizationally bigger because they threaten different people. So if we're trying to say, hey, let's go from deploying once a quarter to once a week. Okay, well that's a technology problem. That's some behavior problem. We can run an experiment that's safe to fail by having one team try the technology and see if it works. That's great. We found a way to make that experiment thin, but the reality is if that experiment goes bad, it's easy to say, oh, the team didn't do it right, or it only impacted that one team's delivery. Now let's take the same idea and let's run an experiment for changing how we do budgeting. We can certainly decide on a small, thin experiment for how budgeting could be different, and we could run that experiment. And that would be a thin slice instead of saying, hey, let's change how we do budgeting for the entire company all at once. But how we change budgeting is still big, meaning it's organizationally impactful to people with bigger titles. So when we talk about finding ways to de-risk things for those in power, I think we have to be considerate of what level of experiment we're running, whether it's kind of like a strategic, operational, or tactical experiment. Tactical things will always seem less risky to those with power because they're tactical. The more they're drifting up towards operational or strategic, the more we're going to have to find ways to make them both smaller, but also correlate it to that, to what's in it for them and map their interests in achieving that thing. Because otherwise, those types of things are going to be dead on the vine, dead on arrival. Alrighty. Going to keep on going until you guys stop or ask a question.
Adding your point, in my experience, that the most appealing kinds of transformation consulting are the least threatening kinds of, like I used to go and see coaches, some of them with their names being like food, talking with executives about, doing like Legos and improv games and let's play, let's pretend act about things. And I've always thought, oh my God, like this guy's going to get laughed out of the room. These executives aren't going to be okay with that, but they love it. You come in and start talking about, economic models for value and empiricism, and boy, did they not like that. I think the lack of juice in the squeeze, all sizzle, no steak, is very appealing because it doesn't feel like it's not threatening. Like it doesn't threaten the executive's current power structure.
Do you think Lego would make budgeting conversations less threatening?
I mean, presuming that at the end of the Lego activity, nobody learned anything and nothing materially changed, then yes.
Perfect. I'm always reminded of that scene in Spaceballs when Dark Helmet's playing with his action figures, like, oh, we're gonna move DevOps over here, and oh, what if product set over here? Look, or we're gonna have a product owner, scrum master, dev manager, business analyst.
I was in a workshop where the coach ran this game, and at the end of the game, I didn't understand what we were supposed to have learned, and I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make the coach look bad. But the other people on the team in the room were like, but we don't understand what we were supposed to learn from that. And the coach was like, whatever you learned is the right thing to have learned. You just take away whatever you took away and you grow and you get better. And I was like, holy crap. And the next time we played that game, I interfered and said, hey, what if we did this demand analysis workshop instead? And everybody from the team came to me afterwards and said, hey, thank you. We played that game like 5 times, and 5 times we don't know why we played that game. So we were really dreading having to do it again.
But the 6th time, it's like the castle that fell into the swamp.
Right. Oh, that's what it was. I got some.
But the 5th time, it stood strong.
Whatever your feelings, whatever the thing your feelings told you got out of this was the right thing to get. And people are like, but how do I work differently now? And they're like, however you feel like you should work different. Like, oh my God.
Do what feels good. Not well aligned. I'm sure everybody's seen or experienced this one. It's I think one of my favorite ones was I was at a large EHR, and the transformation started as an agile transformation, and those people were brought in by the CTO. and his counterpart, the CPO, the Chief Product Officer, and this was before I got there because clearly I was brought in as part of the other transformation. He was jealous. The chief product officer was jealous. He didn't have coaches and he didn't have a transformation. So he brought in a well-known product coach who was there for about 6 months, and then she brought me in. So then there were two of us. And then we had like agile coaches and product coaches, and there was agile transformation and a product transformation, and it was happening at the same time. And when you asked either of those people, either the CTO or the CPO, like, awesome. Do you guys agree on what, like, we're transforming the org twice? Why? Like, what outcome are, and other than Beyonce, like, as soon as you got past the hand wavy, oh, we just want to be better and faster and stuff. As soon as you're like, oh, awesome, like, what specific, like, strategic outcomes or business capabilities are we targeting with our product transformation? It was nothing. And the kinds of things they said, they weren't in an agreement on or an alignment on, and there was not a measurable, meaningful business outcome that either one of them would sign their name to specifically to be like, yes, we want to see this meaningful thing happen. And there was a lot of spinning. There was a lot of well, and actually, I remember probably a good 9 months into it. I had only been there 3 months at that point. We thought, well, okay, we're gonna have this like come to Jesus meeting with the CPO that brought us in, and we're like, what is it that you want to see? And like, we're really pushing him, and he got frustrated. We're sitting in like his office with his like big glass panel, this giant oak desk that, his chair was 2 inches higher than our chair. Um, and he slams his hands down and stands up and he said, I'm not exactly sure. That's why I brought in consultants. And I'm like, well, awesome. At least we're getting to some truth here. You weren't even sure what you wanted. So you actually want the consultants to say what your business outcome is that you need. At least we're getting some real talk. So this has been a fun one, but clearly transformations are going to fail if we've got people running in opposite directions or spending a lot of time and energy pushing in directions that you get to certain points and it's not going to be supported. It's not going to continue to be funded. We're not going to staff it appropriately. We're not going to make the trade-offs for transforming. Like, change takes time and learning and effort. So if you're not going to be able to make those trade-offs because you can't quantify what the business outcomes are that you're going for. Even if one person says that, if you've got one person on an executive team that can quantify that, but nobody agrees with that person, it's about the same as having nothing. So this has been a killer, I think, clearly. Sometimes, and I'm not always, it's hard to tell if there is clear alignment when you have poor communication and feedback, because you don't always know if you're working on the right thing. So sometimes people up at the top, they do feel that they've got a named problem they'd like to improve. It's interesting, though, when you start talking to different people kind of up and down the rank and file, like what they think the transformation is about. And they either don't know, which is the lack of clarity, or they feel like they've not been told. So it's poor communication feedback, or the problems that they're hearing through their grapevine, rightly or wrongly, that they think the executives think they're dealing with, aren't the problems the individual contributors or mid-management think are the real problems to be dealing with. So there's just a lack of general communication flow up and down, much less side to side throughout the organization, about what the problems are. So poor communication and feedback, which, yes, feedback is a style of communication, but it's putting in those feedback mechanisms. So even if we did have great communication and great alignment, we're not going to be able to do it right with one big plan. So as you try things, you're going to learn stuff. So baking in that feedback and how you sense and respond to change as you're changing is crucial too. And so as you ignore feedback or ignore the problems that people are having during the change, that is another great way to fail, because people are just going to not stay engaged throughout the change effort. And I'm sure that's been a common thing that you've all loved. So what can we do about it? Not a lot. This is kind of, I think, platitude-y. We can understand and work towards agreed upon outcomes. I think this is obvious, but I think maybe we don't always push as hard as we can. I think when we're internal employees, it's harder to push for that understanding. as consultants, I guess it depends on when you build last. It's very easy to say, hey, I'm an outside objective voice. I'm not going to engage with you unless we have a clear demonstrable target or something that we're working towards as part of our transformation. But all of those things get, I don't know, get squidgy as financial challenges are present for people. But it would be nice to at least get the stated agreed upon outcomes, so then we can at least say we're working towards them. Or if we're asked to do things that don't feel like they're in alignment with those outcomes, we could ask the question if we feel we have the safety. I think the other thing we can do is provide lots and lots and lots of communication opportunities. Ooh, Jen, question?
Yes. Yeah, it's just what was that book like on the chaos and things like that from Tom Peters or one of those. Anyway, yeah, it's like it really is just anyway. I just think like as people have already mentioned around the same thing. But I just think it's like a lot of the leaders, they don't necessarily want, the truth. You remember like with the back in the days of the kings, the
Yeah,
kings the person who told them the truth got their force beheaded.
that's right.
So
What was that
yeah.
Vietnam movie? Apocalypse? Was it Apocalypse Now? Or was it, what am I thinking of? The You Can't Handle the Truth.
No, that's a Few Good Men.
Okay, different.
Like there are consequences.
Yeah, well, and that's that. I mean, I think that's sort of by design, not like intentional maliciousness, but it's systemically reinforced. If we had if we had different power structures, distributed power structures, or other mechanisms, possibly, so that we weren't as worried about like where our healthcare or ability to feed our family was going to come from, maybe we'd speak up more in meetings. Maybe that's too edgy, but just if we were made to feel comfortable and that our contributions were valued and acted upon with regularity, we would feel more comfortable speaking up. But you're absolutely right. Like nobody wants to point out to the emperor that it's a bit drafty, because they
Yeah,
don't want to be.
and that's why a lot of the business do fail because they surround themselves with the yes men and yes women.
That's right.
I think except when it's a huge enterprise. Like I think that's the other thing we don't think about is how too big to fail a lot of these enterprises are. I mean, Microsoft could, crap the bed for decades and they'd still have enough capital to be just fine. So it's like that's a lot of like I think a lot of the transformation mythology out there, especially among the transformation consulting and coaching communities, is like, well, if you don't do it this way, then someone's going to eat your lunch, and then you're going to go out of business. And it's like, well, I mean, except for that business has been not doing it this way for 40 years and they're in the Fortune 10. So exactly at what point are they going to get disrupted out of business? Like it's just not going to happen for a lot of places. So there's no burning platform.
I
Yeah,
I
that's a
worked.
great point. If they were to make changes, and like you said, Matt, it didn't fail if let's because it's either it's a success or if it's a failure. If it was a success, they could have exponentially grown. But even if they fail, they'll still probably survive and still hold a pretty good position
Yeah.
anyway, just because of
Yeah.
they're probably top in their market or
Well, and by and large, and this kind of comes back to the status quo thing for many senior leaders, is like that's not worth the risk to them individually. Like if they take a big risk and they get their company to double their market share, which would be amazing in most markets, like great, they get a really great bonus and lots of accolades. But I mean, I think about like the CEO of Ford, who was the CEO when I was there, and he was not let go because CEOs of Ford don't get let go, but he moved on and a new CEO came in. That dude that got let go was there for a few years, like a little bit above average. But while he was there, his salary alone was like $12 million annually. So at some point, it's not about the money. Like if you're making 12 million a year and like, I don't know, 18 or 20 million a year in total comp, you don't really care about the next bonus. I don't think. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you do. I've never earned that much money, so maybe
Care
maybe
about
you
this
do.
status of generating bonuses for those above you, and also to speak to the doubling market share situation, I think that often would get cut off because it's even worse if it works. If you do something dramatically different and it's very successful, that reflects poorly on the pre-existing leadership and many of whom are still there. And so that's a bigger threat. Like, I think there's a fallacy that these people are largely there to drive profit, to drive revenue, to create these customer outcomes. I think they're largely there to further their own interests. And if you do something that's politically bad for the leadership structure, then you get shut down. Like, that's not successful either. And it doesn't matter what the outcome. You made the other executives look bad, and now you're free to go spend more time with your family. And it's easy to attribute any massive gain to other things because it's a complex system, right? You can go, oh, that guy did these crazy things, and yeah, the market's doubled or whatever, but these were the circumstances, or market conditions shifted, or this competitor went under, whatever. Like, you can find a way to take the credit away from the transformation for that big win.
And this is not new. Like, one of my favorite things to point out about what you're saying, Adam, is like Deming said this stuff. Like, my favorite Deming quote that alludes to this is when he said, they don't give a hoot about profits, the they being executives. Or what's that Akoff quote that's something like, profits are the tax that executives pay to enable their own well-being. Like, that's Akoff. I mean, Deming and Akoff, these aren't spring chickens. Like, they're all dead. They've been talking about this stuff since like the 60s and 70s. So, I mean, it's been a while.
It is, I mean, that's what I'm thinking, like the main thing, or at least one of the things that you're highlighting, or I think you're highlighting, is the incentive. The C-level, they don't have the incentive to change because they already set, right? They're the company is been successful. There is no reason to transform or change anything. So the status quo is, like you said, the safest bet. And for the employees, they don't have incentives either, because actually the intent, if they speak up, they may get punished for speaking, or fired, right? So it's a double whammy for the company. No one has the incentive to change anything. So, keep the status quo.
And by design. And it's been working.
By design,
working
right.
for some people for a
Yeah,
couple
I
of
worked
centuries.
at a nonprofit, and interestingly, they were trying to do some agile stuff at a nonprofit, but then at some point, one of the VPs is like, we're a charity. Why would, there's no incentive for us to change anything, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Same thing if you think about it from the public companies, and they have no competition. What's the incentives for them to change? There's
Yep.
Yeah, I've worked in nonprofit space as well, and I've made the argument that, you're not trying to maximize profit, but you still need to generate revenue in order to further the outcomes that you're pushing, right? As a nonprofit, you're still fundamentally engaging in a capitalist system. You're doing things to bring in resources that you can then redistribute or to drive to those outcomes. And that's been my ethos that I bring to nonprofit clients, is to say, well, sure, you're not there to profit, but you are there to maximize your outcomes. Your strategic goals are still there. You're still trying to get as many people free cancer treatment, or as many people, whatever your actual purpose is. That's what you're trying to maximize, and those are the stakes of transformation. But there's no real appeal to those things because the politics are so fraught that, and it's not even like you'll get in trouble, or you'll be like, those limitations last forever. Like 5 years from now, because you looked bad in a meeting, you're not going to be considered for a promotion. Or you're like, I've had directors where, they were just doing a good job, but the thing they said offended another executive. And then 2 years later, they're in their annual review with their boss, and their boss goes, well, you have this problem. And this person goes, well, wait, did that happen again? Like, because we're talking about something from 2 years ago. Was there a recurrence that you're referring to? Well, no, but that's still like, that's the rep. And he's like, that was 2 years ago. Like, am I going to hear about this for the rest of my career? And the answer is yes. 5 years from now, you're still going to hear about, well, you have a problem with executives. What? Because that one meeting 5 years ago? Yep. So
And I think it stays in a circle too. It's not just like, hey, in this group of leaders at a company, like when you get to that echelon of like executives of Fortune X companies, I mean, it's the same thing. Like there's a VC community, and if you get a bad rep as a bad operator at a startup in the VC community, like all those VCs talk. Same thing in private equity. So, same thing in like how many of these people that are, C-suite level people or V-suite level people at Fortune 500s or Fortune 10s that are board members on each other's boards. Like, so there's a cross-pollinating that happens. So I think the incentive is no longer financial and the incentive becomes reputation at that level and what you're willing to do to keep and maintain that. So I think that there's some interesting pressure. And that's why, like, when you think about like ultimately you have to map some of these change things to make them small and tie them to something they care about. I think the problem with a lot of especially agile transformations is and to kind of like piggyback onto Adam's story about the kind of woo-woo coach that he had an experience with, but there's a lot of agile that is about shifting power down to teams. Um, and I think that that creates a lack of safety because it creates an appearance of lack of control or certainty from the people that are expected to have that. So I think that's an interesting challenge about the threats and how power tends to shape the nature of change, which means, I mean, if we want to at least be realistic about it, we can identify what the likely things are that we can change. And ironically, because we've been doing agile transformations for the better part of the last, what, decade and a half or so, we can see what the pattern is. Like we're fine rolling out Scrum or even Kanban, maybe doing some dev training, like some hands-on technical coaching. Maybe we're even okay getting some mid-level management involved through the lens of like a PMO, but it's always through how we do planning. Sometimes at more progressive companies, they might start moving towards things like incremental budgeting. So you can kind of see what happens when you start going beyond some of those boundaries. You start finding the edge cases where change has actually happened. You'll come back, and at least in my like experience, you'll come back to the companies that were experiencing some sort of crisis or were about to experience pain through success. So Ford is doing a lot of changes. Like they've had some interesting transformation stories that are good and bad, but they're probably in that boat of feeling threatened by Tesla. So they're probably more in that crisis mode. Whether or not Ford will ever make the leap to be transformed, whatever that looks like for them, is I think time will tell. But that's an example where they're at least willing to spend a lot of money in different ways to try to figure out how to change their company because they're feeling crisis mode impending. But alrighty, systems. Was there another thought question? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna share like the idea. I'm reading this book about like why like motivation and the author is making the point why motivation doesn't work, like the sort of the traditional carrot and stick motivation. Um, and 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 then she goes on about like the reasons people need to have the reasons for a change, which, the story that you mentioned earlier, when you press the VP for reasons, why are we changing? What are the outcomes? He got upset. It's just like, I thought we
You
brought the
tell me.
consultants to tell me. So it's like, I have to give you reasons for you to change, right? You don't know why you're changing. I have to tell you why you're changing. So, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Assuming we get through those top three, the company thinks it's worth it. Somehow we've gotten senior leaders on board for whatever reason, and we've got some agreement and alignment on what outcome we're seeking. I think the bottom two are probably the most operational ways that I've seen transformations fail. I think you could even work from the bottom up in this list. So I think if you came in, you could make some assumptions about what should be true with regards to alignment and business outcome. And then if we at least followed a systems first, people centered way, I think you would be able to manifest the change to as much as will be possible in that environment, meaning until you threaten a power boundary in a way that you shouldn't have. So when I think about what systems first is or isn't, I suppose the problem is that I don't think that we think about change in an interconnected way, that an organization is a complex adaptive system. But to me, what that means, it's this tapestry that has been um, woven together to build the org that it is. And then we've joked a little bit already that all these things are kind of working by design. But what is that design? What is the organization design? And so I think what we can do about that is kind of go through understanding what a whole org. I think unfortunately org design too often is just shorthand for restructure or like just the structural aspects, but there's a lot more. So understanding the forces at play inside an organization of the org design, understanding that as you change something, because it's all interconnected, there will always be ripple effects. There will be unintended consequences. That doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but there will be consequences that we didn't intend to happen. So we have to be able to at least attempt to sense those and account for them as we move on. And then again, kind of coming back to this idea of like designing a small experiment with intentional learning and figure out how to bake that back in because of the ripple effects. So we can go through those things. And then I think kind of building on that, and some of these words will make more sense in just a second, but we have to have more than just opaque change. And I kind of contrast the opaque changes as the things that are visible and easy to see with the obscure changes, which are more invisible and harder to see. We have to change more than just the tactical. If we want to do something that's truly systemic and considering the whole org design, if we're going to just, I think Klaus Leopold, who I can't remember the name of his book, but um, in that book, he said something like, you can't team level way to organizational change because it's a system that you're trying to nudge. And then
ability or rethinking Agile.
Yes, it's pink and has a lot of pictures in it. And
no, it's blue and has a lot and it has like cartoon comics in it.
Yes, well, comics are pictures. So anyways, focusing. So this is a model. It's called the Systems First Model, and you can go to www.thekeyforces.org and get more information about it there. But the reason I like this model is that it's a heuristic model. So there's a lot here. So I kind of want to walk through it pretty quickly. Starting by this idea of opaque forces and obscure forces. So again, opaque being the ones that are easy to see, versus obscure being things that are harder to see. You'll kind of notice that they're categorized into these 6 buckets. So centering forces in general are things that kind of bring us together. I think what's important about centering forces is they're necessary but not sufficient. So the aligning forces, like you can think about like strategy, like what are we doing or what are we trying to accomplish? Like that would be an aligning force, and that's great. But having your strategy is great because you need that strategy to be able to make other trade-offs towards the strategy, but having it isn't necessary. It's not enough to make the changes. It helps you set the direction. So the defining forces are called the defining forces because they define what actually will happen. So there's shaping forces, which I think of the shape as like it's like your skeleton. It dictates what's going to be possible. So like I can't hold 5 beers because I only have 2 arms. I'd need at least a 3rd arm, which would be a structural change if I wanted to hold a 5th beer because I can hold 2 in each hand as it currently stands. And kind of the same thing with the acting forces. So shaping is structural, it defines what's possible. Acting is more behavioral and it kind of defines what will happen. And then last but not least, we've kind of got these amplifying forces. So while I think of like defining forces as the strongest forces, and then centering forces as the weaker forces, but necessary but not sufficient, amplifying is exactly that. So amplifying, and the reverse of amplifying would be dampening, but forces in the organization that are either operating or developing will either make things easier or harder, the change easier or harder, depending on if it's in balance with the rest of the system. And so then just kind of remembering that all of these things are interconnected. So each of these things there's lots of elements, and an element in an organization design is just this. It's a practice, a policy, a process, a procedure, a structure, an artifact, a capability. It's kind of any noun in the organization. And so these core elements in the systems model are kind of the main elements, and they're kind of organized by strategic, operating, and tactical within their little bubbles, that tend to be the things that are the major things at play in most large organizations. Some of these would probably be different if you're looking at startups. There are lots and lots of elements because clearly out of the things that are listed here in the model versus every practice, policy, procedure, et cetera, that you could find in an org, there's lots of them. So there's a lot of things that could be there. And then this is just to help us remember that all of these things are interconnected. So if you change something like power distribution over on one side, it's going to connect to everything else in some way. And that's what makes this a heuristic model is we're not diagramming this out from scratch like we would be if we were doing a causal loop diagram or containers, differences, and exchanges modeling exercise. So this is sort of giving you some places to look at so you don't have to start from a blank slate. When I run these activities, I actually start with just the forces with an explanation of what they are, but without the elements listed. And then we put the change, the thing that we think we want to make. So the outcome and then what we think we need to do to achieve that outcome in the center. And we just start going around the circle and being like, hey, how does our organizational purpose of objective map to this? Or how do our synchronized values do these things? And so you can start going through it and getting ideas about what parts of your organization would need to shift to accomplish the outcome that you're talking about. And if you say things like, for example, down in operating, there's funding. So if somebody says, hey, like funding is off the table, we can't change how funding works. That's too political. Awesome. That doesn't mean we can't do some stuff. It just means like, hey, let's actually note that in our model, in our diagram. And then let's take a look at how would funding then affect how we do skills and capabilities, or how would funding change how we do our reward systems, or how we do, our organizational structures or roles and responsibilities. So you can kind of go through that. One thing I like doing in this is to point out some transformations that I've been a part of. So like in Agile, aka Scrum, I know Agile isn't supposed to mean Scrum, but whatevs, like an Agile Scrum transformation. When I take a look using this model at what I see normally having changed, it would be just these things. So out of all these, 3 times 6, out of all these 18 key elements in all these forces, a Scrum-oriented transformation tends to only focus on 4 things. You'll notice that they're mostly amplifying, maybe a little defining, and they all tend to be mostly tactical, which is interesting to me. If we look at a DevOps transformation, very similar. And this is my experience only. This is not meant to be the right answer. These arrows have definitely made some people angry. But DevOps tends to focus a little bit more on just like roles and tactical stuff, a little bit of workflow, a little bit of tooling and skills. Safe, I love to pick on safe. So, okay, it's safe, so it's enterprise ready. So we had to throw an arrow up on strategy. But if you'll notice, there's some interesting patterns emerging. Product transformation, this has more. At least that's been my experience. But as we go through these, digital transformation, you'll notice a pattern of all these. Other than maybe skills and capabilities in the developing side, in the developing area of the obscure forces, all of the changes are on the opaque side. Most of the changes tend to be operational or tactical, almost nothing strategic. And most importantly, when you take a look at the defining forces in general, nothing ever touches acting or uniting, ever. And those are the 2 really important ones. So the uniting, you can almost think of uniting as like values-based stuff. So like when you see the things that are in there, what are our values? What are our shared experiences and stories? What behaviors do we allow from like leadership and management, especially? So when you think about like acting being that force that dictates what an organization will do, and when you think about how come all of these transformations don't really achieve much transformation, well, when none of them are touching that acting circle, why would we ever expect behavior to change or lasting behavior change if we're never changing anything over in that spot? So I think that's an interesting takeaway for me. I'll pause and see if anybody wanted to chat about that model. I got another one.
So question, do you usually start with a specific the forces? Is that the starting point?
Yeah, so like normally what I would do would be probably, sorry, I have all these arrows. I'd probably start with something like this. And I would probably include a definition of what those forces mean. Like that's on the website. Like what does aligning mean? What does shaping mean? Give overview. And this could be, you could throw something like this on a Miro board or on a whiteboard if you're in person. And, again, you kind of come back to putting putting the change in the middle. Like, oh, we want to be agile. Well, great. What does that mean? Okay, well, agile means we want to be able to sense and respond to things that are happening in the market, to our current customers, and we want to be able to adapt our products to meet user needs in a business market viable way more quickly. Awesome. So now we've got a good definition of what agile means. We know what we think we need to do. So then we can start throwing things out there like, great. Oh, I want to, I want to teach all the teams continuous delivery. Okay. Well, we can kind of guess, well, where does continuous delivery fall in here? Developing. Okay. Well, what are we going to need for developing? Well, we're going to need to train some people, maybe some tooling. How do people behave differently? Well, now as soon as we say, well, people need to act differently when they do continuous delivery, now we can go up to the acting circle. Well, why would they act in any which way? What do we currently have in the acting circle? Again, thinking about what these elements are. What processes, policies, procedures, structures, artifacts, reward systems are in place that might cause resistance against doing continuous delivery? And I pick continuous delivery because it's a tactical practice in the first place. Imagine if you go to the other side of that spectrum. We should do OKRs and we should change how we do strategy. Oh shit. All right. We're going all the way over. Like we still probably have like some skills and capability stuff in the developing, like what is OKRs and how do you do them? And maybe we get some training. But now we're going all the way up to aligning, like how do we do strategy deployment? How do we do comms as an organization? And again, you can start going through each of these things, talking through just the forces first, based on what it is that you think you want. Starting with your outcome, and then backing into the a change you think you want to make. And then you just kind of keep going around. Then you can start adding in the elements. So you can either, as like a phase two, you can use the elements that have been identified in the model. But it's also interesting, I think, to have the people that are going through the activity identify elements that they think are important to the change they're trying to make. And you can either do that without showing them these core elements at all, or you could have them do that first, just so you get their input first and then show them the core elements and see like how much overlap is there, or does that trigger any other ideas to get them going through it. That can answer your question, Sal?
Yes. Yep.
Cool.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah, Will.
hey, Matt, this is Will. I just had an observation that's taking in all the information, and so I've done transformation for a while, and learned different approaches. But I kind of feel like another element that torpedoes any transformation is maybe there's like a singular focus on, let's use this approach, where, because whatever you're transforming, whatever business is so dynamic that maybe you need a collection of approaches kind of brought together. And the reason I said that, because you're talking about the acting, and so pro sci, right, it's a lot about change management. But I do notice a lot of transformation projects or initiatives big on the technology, big on the budget, finances, capabilities, but the acting, as you're pointing out, is totally forgotten. I think it's assumed that, hey, people will just get this and they'll learn a new way to do work or whatever. And a lot of times that's like that missing ingredient. So, like I said, I just had this thought as you were going through a lot of the information. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I definitely think that we want to just we want to have the right answer. So we want to know that if we use this methodology or this approach, then we will be right. I think there's an interesting corollary. The more prescriptive a model or framework is, I think the more attractive it is to businesses that want to do change. I think the more like principles and values based it is, those are squishier. Like, so companies then need to figure out how to apply those principles and values. And that's actually kind of a reason why I like this model in general. Is a heuristic model is a little bit more in the middle. This isn't just pithy values and principles that you have to figure out how to apply. This gives you specific areas to go look at and figure out how they interconnect to achieve the outcome. But it's not like a safe framework, or it's not like a pro sci process. It's not saying if you do this and fill out these worksheets and do follow exactly Scrum and answer these 3 questions, then poof, you're transformed and amazing. So I feel like this strikes a bit of a middle ground, because you still have to do the thinking, to figure out what needs to change in your org and how you want to do it. But it gives you like areas, pattern areas or practice areas to go look at. Um, if I were going to draw arrows by probably the elements that I thought were the most important for getting an organization to actually change, I'd probably point to experiences and narratives up in the uniting circle. To me, that's like how do we experience things? Like if you're a new guy onboarding, um, how do you get socialized into the norms of your organization? What is the culture like? And when I don't mean culture in some hand wavy way, but like what are the stories? What are the artifacts? Who are the important people? What are the important rituals and meetings that we go to? And then the narratives, like what are the stories? Like what, and if we want to change, then of course the change part goes to what do we need to do to change the experiences and create new narratives to how we want things to work. And then I'd probably point to our organizational norms and our reward systems second, because again, the reward systems is how we extrinsically try to motivate people through however we do bonusing and comp and promotions. But the organizational norms is it's how we do things around here. It's what we think is the right way to get our job done. And those organizational norms relate directly to our experiences and narratives. Like those two things go hand in hand. The experience and narratives guide what the organizational norms are. And then probably to actually achieve those two things, I would look at leadership development down in the developing circle, because we have to develop our leadership capabilities both in our formal leaders but also in our informal leaders to learn how to lead in new ways, to create new organizational norms and create new experiences and narratives. And ironically, like you notice from this set of slides, nothing that I've seen, whether it's in the model or not, I've never seen an organization transformation start with saying, hey, we need leaders to be incentivized differently in a new reward structure with a goal of changing these experiences for these people and creating new narratives. Like, I don't know if you just get laughed out of the house, probably, but um, anyways, I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Alrighty, boop-a-doop-boo. All right, people centered. So this has all been a lot of what, like, is it worth it? Senior leaders, blasey blasey, and plenty of snark and a little bit of jadedness, which is always a favorite thing for me. But I think when it comes to the people-centered change, this is like the how. So we can design the perfect change plan in theory, but folks don't always know what it's expected of them. They're not always able to do what's being asked of them, and I think people want to have some say in the change. I think Esther Derby called it the fingerprints principle in her book. I don't know if that's her term or if she got it from somewhere else, but I like the idea of like, did they get a chance to put their fingerprints on it as a concept? Um, I think that we need to make sure that as we're rolling out the changes, that we over communicate. Like people are fearful. We're fearful of loss. I don't think we resist change so much as we avoid loss. And over communicating can at least help close the gap of uncertainty, which uncertainty isn't necessarily directly a loss, but it amplifies feelings of loss. If we're worried about something, uncertainty is going to make us worry more. And Amanda, so speaking, I mentioned earlier that I was at Ford, and one of the worst things that I experienced in all of my years doing change was they did communicate that they would be cutting job roles. They also communicated to not worry about it, that everybody was going to keep their employment, but they weren't sure yet about what was going to happen with everybody's jobs. And that made everybody freak out because not everybody, but only the people that were in a job category that they knew was going away. Not everybody believed that they were going to get to keep employment. So some people worry this was just a nice way of signaling layoffs. This was 5, 6 years ago at this point. Some people thought that Ford would keep to their word and not cut them, but they were like, but I like my job and I like my team and I'm nervous about what's going to happen because they're saying me that I'm not going to have this job anymore. What am I going to do? And they don't know. And so I don't know. I don't know if that was certainly over communicating. They definitely communicated stuff. But I do think it wasn't doing a great job trying to reduce the uncertainty. while you're changing, let people know if they're doing it right. This is just like straight up change management psychology. And I think I just mentioned this concept. People aren't resistant to change. We say, oh, that person's resisting change. People avoid loss. So we're loss avoidant. And I think there's what's that model? SCARF. I always forget what it stands for though, but like there's feelings of like status and identity and things that we're afraid of losing psychologically. And we're worried about what those things mean to us, about losing them or those things changing in a way that are diminishing for us. And so I think one kind of fun technique is to, when we think somebody's being resistant, we can pattern match it to loss avoidance and start asking ourselves, well, what is it they're afraid of losing? And then see if we can address that as a change agent. On that same website, the key forces, you'll notice there's another model called the people first model. And it sort of encourages us to, when we think about how to make the changes, to make the changes through the lens of what I think of as through the employee's experience or the lived experience of the people going through the change. So this is the people-centered model. It's similar color scheme, same place, keyforces.org. Align, activate, and adjust. So this isn't necessarily meant to be linear, but as a model, I find it useful to think through it in a linear way, because alignment is basically, have we given the clarity and have we assessed the capability? So do they actually know what the outcomes are? Are they interested in those outcomes? Like, is it clear to them what we're trying to do and why it's important to them? And then the capability is, can they do the thing we've asked them? They might be very clear on what the change is, but if they don't have the skill or talent to be able to do whatever we've asked, then that's going to be very frustrating for them. So how will we evaluate the capabilities? How will we support them during that time, using those capabilities and then growing those capabilities if we don't have them? When you try to activate the change, so you'll notice that like invitation and involvement. So this kind of comes back to those fingerprints idea. People want to be asked to be a part of something. They want to be a part of identifying the problems. They want to be told what the problems are. They want to feel like they have some choice in the solution to the problems. And pathways is sort of like a nice way of saying like, hey, not everybody's going to be able to be on the change path. So we need to find some way of helping people. If we're going to invite some people, there's going to be people who don't want to be invited, or people who come because they were invited and realize they don't want to be a part of what we're doing. What pathways are available for everybody, and how can we address those in a better way than just saying, we're cutting your jobs, you're not getting fired, but we don't know what you're going to do with you. And then involving them. So people want to feel like they have a contribution. They want to see how their contribution is showing up and what's happening. People want to feel that they're responsible for something they're being asked to do. One of my favorite studies about responsibility, this doesn't exactly map to org change, but it was improvement in health outcomes for senior citizens in nursing homes if they were given a plant to take care of, like a bush. And it was crazy, just same old folks, same kind of nursing home, same type of situation. And if they had to like give their plant water every day, they had this living thing to take care of. And it improved their moods, and it improved their healthcare outcomes, which was kind of cool. And then autonomy. We talk a lot about autonomy, but some freedom to act within whatever bounds we've provided. Of course, we say that like, yeah, but figuring out what those bounds are can always be a little bit tricky. We want bounded autonomy. Of course, if you bind it too tight, it's not really autonomy. If the bounds are too loose, we're actually back up to clarity and capability problems. So thinking about what's the right level of bounded autonomy within the change is important. Hint, you can ask them, and that's not a bad thing to do, because then that gives us back to choice and invitation. And then last but not least, the adjust stuff. So seeking feedback and understanding sensing mechanisms. So feedback should be positive, frequent, and specific. So positive doesn't mean like, yay, cheerleader. Positive means more like positive reinforcing. So when they do something that's what they're supposed to be doing or not, you're giving them a stimulus to say, yes, you should be doing that, or no, you shouldn't be doing that. It needs to be frequent. If you're giving infrequent feedback, it's not enough to reinforce whatever behavior we're doing. And it needs to be specific. If you just tell people, hey, good job on that change, and people don't know what the change was, or they don't know what specifically they did that was good, at best, it'll be nice. Like pizza lunch on Friday for the good work. Like, awesome, love pizza. But if you're not telling me specifically what I did a good job or a bad job doing, I'm not going to know. The pattern's not going to get reinforced. And then we have to sense to be able to adjust. So sensing loss avoidance, like we just talked about, Sensing changes in the environment. So sometimes that environment could be things like the org design using the other model that we just walked through. Sometimes it can be the environment can be the experiences, like how are we running a staff meeting, or how are we, running a go-to-market launch program? Like, so understanding maybe some of the experiential aspects of the environment, and then understanding like sensing some of the habit changes. So there's all sorts of books out there about like how to stack habits or how to like, but what we're basically trying to do if we want change to stick is we're trying to get new behaviors out of people. We need, new behaviors create new actions, create new results. So we need those habits, and we need those habits to stick. So how can we sense that the habits are changing, that they're changing in the right way, and that they're going to stick once we've removed whatever change pressure we've added to the system? And that's kind of this model in a nutshell. And so then that's kind of the end of the talk. So don't let your transformation fail. Here's the 5 things you should do. And yeah, if you want to talk more about it, I know we've got a little bit of time left, but I'm easily findable on LinkedIn because my last name is not very common. And if you want a Calendly, I have a Calendly link in my LinkedIn profile, so I'm easy to find. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Yeah, this is a small group, but yeah, this been very insightful. Thank you, Matt.
Not too
Uh,
jaded, or
not
just
to
jaded enough?
yeah. Yeah, I always like to approach these topics. I know it's like a big topic and there are a lot of pieces that you went over, especially that model is very, very interesting and insightful.
Be
We
dense.
may may want to dig a little deeper into it, but I know we're running out of time and we only have a small group. But um any questions or thoughts from anyone on the still here? Anything?
Yeah, I'll
Thank you.
just
It was great. No questions, but I appreciate it. It was great talk.
Thank you.
yeah, same here. And it
Thanks,
brought
Phil.
back some memories. I think everybody's been, sounds like, consulting for a while or in that space. So brought back some memories. And also, this is therapeutic because I'm like, okay, well, it wasn't just me because I've had some weird things happen on some of these projects. And you start thinking, like, man, did I screw something up? Or, so it's good to hear some war stories. So,
Yeah.
Good.
I'm wondering how did the story end with the VP who just, um
Oh,
like
Kyle? Yeah,
got,
well,
got
I
up and
mean,
told you I thought you were the one who were gonna tell us what to do, what to change or why
well, it's
changing.
the story in
But
a weird way because they got bought.
recording.
All right.
Just say
Oh yeah. Well, he doesn't work there anymore.
perfect.
But no, what wound up happening was right as our gig was up for renewal, um, there was basically a hostile takeover. The company was a publicly traded company, and one of the board members raised money through private equity and took over, like bought out the company because they thought the CEO was running it into the ground. And when he came in, they basically did an executive hydrocolonic, and our gig did not get renewed, and the executive team that was there was no longer there. So fun.
I
So
think
they wanted the private equity firm to run it into the ground instead.
It's much better that way. Yeah.
Guaranteed.
this like this is like a sequel to this talk, like why transformation failed. This could be why dual transformation failed because you have like product transformation, agile transformation going on at the same time.
Yeah.
So
Well, it was the first time I think I'd actually formally hung my hat on the product coach peg. Like, I think I'd always kind of been like, yeah, I'll say whatever words I need to say to talk to whoever I need to talk to. But because there were named agile coaches already there, when we came in, we were told, like, you have to be product coaches. And we're like, whoa, okay, whatever. And ironically, I didn't think it was going to make that big of a deal, but it made a huge deal. Like, we needed to talk to the VP of sales about changing like how sales compensation worked with regards to how we're comping sales with regards to roadmap planning for our product leaders. And it was no big deal. We're like, hey, we need to talk to the head of sales. They're like, not a problem. His EA sits right over there. Just go talk to her. She'll get your counter. We talked to that guy like within a week of talking to his EA. We went and met with the Agile coaches, and they're like, oh my God, we've been trying to get a hold of that guy for months. What did you do? We're like, I don't know. We just talked to his EA, and she got us on his calendar. So when we met the head of sales, we're like, hey, we heard the Agile coaches have been trying to get a hold of you. He's like, yeah, I heard that too. I don't know why I'm head of sales. Why would I want to talk to Agile coaches? And I'm like, I don't even know what that means, but it's like the CTO brought them in. They're doing IT Scrum stuff. Why would a sales executive need to talk to Agile? Like, so I don't know. It was an interesting, clear distinction, at least at that company. And I've experienced similar things since then. So, um, but I would encourage everybody to look into worker cooperatives if you aren't familiar with what those are, because I don't believe they are the future, as in some utopian end state that will solve all of our problems. But I do think that worker cooperatives are a better business structure that will help disperse some of the power that we see in current corporations as structures. They're not a utopia, and they're not going to solve all the problems, but they'll get us to a more equitable place with distributed power structures in organizations to make better changes. Because ultimately, my experience has been it tends to be the centralized power structures that wind up being the biggest limiting factors to the most major portions of organizational change. So shameless plug for worker cooperatives. Yay. And they can scale. Read about Mondragon. They're huge.
Big time.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that company out in California? It is Morningstar or
Morningstar Tomatoes. I mean, they're
Tomatoes?
huge. So they're worker owned. Yep.
Yeah, so
Um,
something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mondragon is in Spain. They're a federated worker cooperative, but they're a multi-billion, multinational worker co-op. And that's cool. There's all sorts of great, like, credit unions are a form of member co-op. Credit unions significantly outperform traditional banks in during the housing crisis of 2008, 2009. Um, yeah, just every time you turn around, and they've doubled. The number of co-ops in the United States has doubled in the last 5 years. So there's something's coming.
I can only hope. Honestly, that's been an element of Agile, and all these transformations there has been an element of self-organization, self-determination, self-management. And fundamentally, those aspects are the ones that fail the most because, of course, leadership structures kill them immediately.
So good time.
Woo!
All right. Well, it sounds like we may have a topic for next time. But appreciate your time, Matt. Thank you for joining. Thanks,
Oh,
Adam, for
thanks
being
for
here,
inviting me.
and thanks everyone
Cool.
for joining us tonight. Uh, and we'll hopefully have a follow-up at some point.
All righty. Take care, so
All
thank you.
right, take care. Bye-bye. See you later.